to order. I want to start by drawing everyone's attention to the Dakota Land, Water, and People Acknowledgement that we have on our agenda. Something to just keep in mind as we conduct our business, both in this meeting and in others. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just let you know that is there and take a look and keep that in the back of your mind as we do our work. Next up, we can take the approval of our agenda by consensus. Are there any changes necessary for our agenda at this point? Okay, hearing none, our agenda is approved as presented. And then we'll go on to approval of the June 5th meeting minutes, and we'll take a motion and second from anyone who is present at that meeting. A motion from David. Is there a second for that? Second from Cecily. Thank you. Are there any corrections needed to those minutes? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes from June 5th as presented, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? That carries and those are approved. Thank you. That brings us to the public invitation portion of our meeting for anyone to address the commission. Has anyone registered this month?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. Remind anyone if you would like to in the future, there's an email address on our agendas. That'll bring us to our business items. First one up will be our annual Metropolitan Regional Parks operation and maintenance allocation. Go ahead and do we have Nicole?
We have Nicole.
Okay. And
Rachel.
Let us know who you are. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Nicole Platt, and I'm introducing our new colleague, Rachel Neville. She's a new budget analyst for Parks who worked with me on O&M this year and will be presenting to you guys next year when you see O&M again. So I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the grants manager for the CDMTS Finance and Administration Unit. And today I'm presenting the annual Metropolitan Parks and Metropolitan Regional Parks and Trail System Annual Operations and Maintenance Allocation. Clicker not clicking.
Sometimes if I do it once.
Oh, there it goes. All right. So,
Or just get up.
Just get out there.
Response. So most of members of the commission will be pretty familiar with O&M. We bring this as an annual item, but just as a refresher, operations and maintenance is set in Minnesota State Statute 473351, and it requires that by July 15th of each year, the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission reports to the council the funding requests from the implementing agencies based on the actual expenditures made in the previous calendar year. So the state legislature funds a portion of the expenses necessary to run the regional parks and trails system because the system draws a significant percentage of its visits from outside of the metropolitan area and the state of Minnesota. So the law requires the council to review the operating expenses of each agency for eligibility on an annual basis. And the distribution of the funds is determined by formula also set in state statute. So that is 40% based on the previous year's O&M expenses, 40% based on the previous year's proportionate share of total system visits, and 20% based on the previous year's proportionate share of total system acreage. So for fiscal year 2026, the legislature appropriated $11,740,000 for distribution to the park implementing agencies for operations and maintenance. So that is made up by $2.54 million from the state general fund. That's been a pretty stable, consistent amount of money over the last couple of fiscal years. And then it's also $9.2 million from the lottery in lieu of sales tax. And that represents a $250,000 increase over last year. And as we understand it, that will be a permanent increase to the lottery in lieu allocation for O&M moving forward. And as a note, the final pass-through amounts will be based on the actual appropriations and revenue received, because that lottery in lieu can shift a little bit, but generally speaking, we receive the full amount. All right, so next slide, this is the table of O&M distribution for state fiscal year 2026. And as you can see, the total approved expenses for the system are just over $143 million. And again, we have $11.7 million to distribute for O&M. So that represents just over 8% of the total approved expenses for the operations and maintenance of the system. And that is despite the state statute calling for the state to fund 40% of the annual costs for operations and maintenance of the regional system. That 8% is fairly consistent over time. Sometimes it's been 9.5%. I think several years ago we had one big jump where it covered 13%, but 8 to 9% has been pretty consistent over the years. So with that, the recommended action is that the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission reports to the Metropolitan Council the Regional Parks and Trail System State Fiscal Year 2026 Operations and Maintenance Funding Requests. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
All right, thank you. One to start with, you mentioned there was an increase to the lottery in lieu that is supposedly permanent. How is that money allocated? I would have figured it was like just a percentage of whatever sales and stuff are, so it would fluctuate. How is there a permanent increase to what I thought was fluctuating number?
Chair and commission members, good question. So yes, it does fluctuate, but the legislature still needs to appropriate the funds that come into the pot. So there's a statute that establishes the percentages that go to the various places supported by lottery in lieu. So there's a big portion that goes to DNR, there's a portion that goes to Outdoor Minnesota, I believe, to a couple of other pots of money.
The zoo.
The zoo, yep. So there's always, they determine that there's enough money coming into that fund to have a consistent increase to the amount appropriated out of that. Sometimes they'll make adjustments and do special one-time increases, which we've seen over the years.
Oh, so it's not like our sales tax stuff where we're distributing all of it. It's more like an endowment where it's what's a responsible distribution kind of a thing.
Correct. Yes, exactly.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, Wendy.
Is this gonna come to community development and the full council?
Chair and council member, yes. I will be presenting it to CDC on Monday, and then it'll be going to the council on July 9th.
Can you add a slide that shows like the last 20 years or so, what percentage of the overall expenditures are? Because it was significantly higher, close to 20 years ago, was like peaked out at I think 17%, and it's had a kind of a slow slide since then. And just so that the council members can see kind of how grim the funding situation has gotten over time.
Chair, council member, yes, absolutely, I'd be happy to do that. We share that history as part of the kickoff to the legislative session every year, so we update it every year. That'll be easy to add in, happy to.
Yeah, I think if you look at like a 6 to 8 year time span, there's sort of one outlier higher and it's otherwise stable. But if you look at, like you said, at 20, it was better once, never 40, but yeah. How are the increases to the actual dollar amounts of the eligible expenses? You know, the expenses by our agencies, are those going up faster or slower than overall inflation, and how is that compared? We were talking about percentages on this, and the raw dollars are probably going up some, but O&M for the overall agencies, I'm guessing they're probably going up by more than inflation because we've been adding to the system in terms of more acres, more miles of trail, things like that.
Chair and commission members, good question. So this year, the increase over last year is just under, right around $10 million overall. Historically, we were maintaining somewhere in the neighborhood of 130 million, give or take. The big change that happened this year that we discussed and reviewed with agencies was the retiring of COVID funds. So there was a lot of agencies that had been using COVID funds for operations and maintenance activities, and they expended all of those dollars So now we're seeing a much bigger increase in their overall O&M expenses that aren't covered by other grant funds. But in terms of keeping pace with inflation, I haven't run that calculation, so I can't say off the top of my head.
I'm just thinking, like, in the context of, presenting to the legislature, if they're looking at raw dollar things and be like, oh, well, we just need to increase this by similar to other budgets, it might not be recognizing that the system's expanding. And that might be part of our story, is that, well, yeah, we're paying more, but also getting more out of it, as opposed to just, well, things are more expensive. Anthony, did you have something?
Yeah, so in terms of the expansion, it looks, with Three Rivers and Minneapolis, they are a major part of it. Is that just visitation, or are they the only ones growing? How are you all?
Chair and commission members, I can speak anecdotally from what I recollect reviewing last year versus this year. So there was pretty significant impacts to changes in visitation. For example, the city of St. Paul's visitation went down fairly significantly, so that impacted their share. While Minneapolis is always the lion's share of visits, so that has a big impact on what they receive from O&M. They also have quite a large share of the expenses for the whole system. Three Rivers is largely impacted by the number of acres that they have in the system, so that has a huge impact for them. And also their share of overall expenses.
And is there a way that the trail development is also playing out in this, in terms of, are we counting trail development as part of their acreage? We are, right?
Mhm.
So that also is shown in the.
Yep, absolutely, and as well, there's been a fair number of changes to the acreage counts based on the GIS improvement, which now has a new name. What's the name of it now?
Modernizing mapping.
Modernizing mapping.
Regional
So-
parks and trails mapping.
So that's starting to show up. Not all agencies are using the updated GIS, but the large majority of them are. So we're getting more dialed in, accurate numbers for acreage in the system.
It is worth calling out, though, that for trails, they're just counted as acreage. They don't have a separate category that's like trail miles or something.
Right.
And that's statutory, right? Not our policy. Or is it?
Chair and commission members, my understanding, Tracy might be best equipped to answer this question, or perhaps even Jessica, but there is a standard trail width that is used for all trails to convert miles into acres, except where an agency like Dakota County, for example, does greenways, so they have large buffers on the side of their trail that are included as part of their trail acreage calculation.
So if someone is doing, like, I know we have some that build trails within county highway right of way. So they don't necessarily have a separate parcel for it. So, but they are counting more than like just the 8 feet. There's some sort of here's your standard width that's more than the pavement they actually put on the ground.
Chair and commission members, that is my understanding, yes, but I am more of the finance numbers,
Yeah.
less the technicality of trail acreage.
Chair, I'll just say, when there is parcel data associated with the trail, we do count the acreage.
Right.
But usually it is that, what Nicole explained, is a conversion of a 30-foot corridor.
Okay.
Okay. Anyone else? Or a motion for it?
I'll move acceptance of the report.
Okay.
Second.
Motion from Bob and a second from Amanda. That is that the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission reports to the Metropolitan Council the Regional Parks and Trails System State Fiscal Year 2026 Operations and Maintenance Funding requests. Is there any further discussion on that? We're just saying we believe these numbers to be true. All in favor of that, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Okay, that motion carries, thank you. That's a good callback also to what we were talking about last month with this mapping project. When we were talking about how sometimes land records are the source of truth, sometimes we can use the GIS. This is one of the kinds of things we can use the GIS for. That's where that number makes sense. And also, when we were talking about visitation numbers, that's why we keep having conversations about revamping our methodology for those visitor counts and the surveys and whether that data is accurate and our assumptions for winter and trails, and it's because it impacts this stuff.
Sounds good.
So, moving on to our next item, we have the Blakely Bluffs Park Reserve. We have a Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund Award for Scott County. Go ahead, Jessica.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners, and Council Member. My name is Jessica Lee. I'm a planning analyst in parks. And I'm here to present the Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund for Blakely Bluffs Park Reserve, the Rise Draft property for Scott County. Blakely Bluffs Park Reserve is a feature park reserve located in the southwest corner of Scott County along the Minnesota River Bluffs. This planned park reserve features large areas of continuous forest, stunning view sheds, dramatic topographic changes, and high-quality habitat. The map on the right shows the park boundary, which is approximately 2,400 acres. The county-owned parcels are shaded in blue. The subject property is shaded in yellow, and the left image shows a close-up of this parcel. This 123-acre property contains 62 acres of matured forest and 10 acres of lowland forest, along with 48 acres of cultivated land that will be restored for natural resources. This property was appraised at $1,700,000, and the purchase price was $2 million. As you probably know, we're only allowed to go up to 110% of the appraised value. So for the grant, the purchase price allowed is $1,870,000. So that makes the total grant project cost $1,950,003 for a total grant amount of $1,462,502 and the Scott County match of $487,501. Our rationale for recommendation is that this acquisition is consistent with the 2050 Regional Parks Policy Plan, the Parks and Trails Legacy Fund, the Blakely Bluffs Park Reserve Long Range Plan, and Scott County is within its $2 million per fiscal year limit for the Parks and Trails Legacy Fund, Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund. And I'll just point out that as of July 1,
Today.
thank you, forgot what day it was there for a minute, forgot what month we were in. As of July 1, the new policy plan limits go into effect, and so our limit now is $2 million per fiscal year instead of 1.7, which you would have seen last month. And for ENRTF, which this one isn't, the limit has gone up to $3 million. So you'll see that in the future. So our recommendation is that the Metropolitan Council approve a grant of up to $1,462,502 from the Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund to Scott County to acquire a 123-acre parcel located at 17525 263rd Street West in Belle Plaine, Minnesota for the Blakely Bluffs Park Reserve, and to authorize the Community Development Director to execute the grant agreement and restricted covenant on behalf of the council. And with that, I'm happy to take questions, and also Patty Freeman from Scott County is here.
Great, thank you. Questions, commissioners? Yes, Cecily?
Always. I had a lot of trouble with this one. You know, $2 million for 123 acres of a park that's not yet open, and very little of the land is already acquired. Is there a master plan for this, or is there just like a rough boundary? How can you master plan it when, can you put the map up again of what's already acquired? If the blue is what's already in place, how do you master plan the rest of it?
Commissioner, there is a long-range plan in place, but I'll ask Patty to come up and speak more to that.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, so Scott County does have a long-range master plan for this facility. So we differentiate, we have two different approaches to our master plans. We kind of have like a acquisition and stewardship vision sort of setting master plan and development master plan. And we really recognize the document that Scott County has approved under the council as an acquisition and stewardship plan. So we have a vision for it. We have, it was a traditional process to do a master plan. It sets up likely recreation and natural resource benefits from the master plan. So despite, actually when we did the master plan, I think the county owned maybe 30 acres So at that time, the master plan was for mostly private land. So it's not, I guess, atypical for agencies that are younger in the system. I can elaborate a little bit on sort of that topic, but last fall, we opened Doyle-Kennefick Regional Park in Scott County, and that was a facility that was master planned, back in, I don't know, maybe 2004. And at the time, Commissioner Harris, the county didn't have any property. It's about a 1,200 acre regional park. And we currently own about 650 acres, and that was just opened last fall. So it's not atypical of how the younger agencies approach their land acquisition and planning.
Yeah, I worked in parks for many years in California, and we would not legally be able to do boundaries like this for land you don't own. So I'm curious, at what point would you open this park?
The board has not given, the county board has not given direction on that as of yet. So there has been a great deal of interest from the county board to update the acquisition master plan to a development master plan. And that is within the next few months we'll be starting that. So we do have plans and a project manager, and that will be commencing, I think, probably September of this year. So that updated plan that really takes a little bit closer look at today's trends, what's happened with the Scott County and the surrounding systems to date, will really help guide an updated vision for the park reserve. And I would anticipate that taking, maybe typically a plan of for something of this size, probably 1.5 years. And at the end of that, I would anticipate that we'll have a phasing of strategy. So I can't imagine us wrapping that plan up without an idea of, what does the next 5 years look like? What does the next 10 years, that sort of thing. So that's what's on the docket related to this park reserve.
Well, I hope you've got willing sellers for some of these other ones, because this really doesn't look very promising.
I think that's true, but it also looks a lot like a lot of our other parks did at one point too. Like I'm thinking out towards you, one of the ones we've seen a lot of movement on even just in the last few years is Big Marine.
Right, I live down the street from there, yeah.
And the acquisition boundary for that was set in 1985.
Slow
So,
process.
similar deal. Yeah, Wendy, go ahead.
The Spring Lake Regional Park by Hastings is another one that is kind of similar in concept to this, where I think it was the original boundary was put in place back in the 1970s or thereabouts, and they did some major upgrades within the past 10 years where they were finally getting the last of it together, but that's normal for here, and it sometimes takes a long time to get the willing sellers, but you'll never get it back if you
No, I understand that, it's just looking at that, is that another 40 million? What would it take to complete that park?
It's been a few years since we've done that analysis. I don't remember what the number is.
Hold on. Yes, Ellen.
It's a great question and a concern. We don't want people feeling like they're losing their property rights. I wanted to say two things. One is the agencies work closely with private landowners and work on largely a willing seller approach. Secondly, I just know all the agencies are out there building relationships with landowners so that we can share these long-term visions with the idea that maybe it will come today, maybe it will be 40 years from now. But the idea is that this is the long-term vision. So, but you're right, I mean, it's a slow process and sometimes it can be intimidating if you own property within that boundary.
It would be nice if they're able to do like just sort of an opening of some piece of it. Like this particular one that we're looking at might not be the candidate, but maybe some of the ones that touch the river or something could be usable sooner than the rest. Bob?
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, I have had the pleasure of going out to this piece of property several times with the Scott County Commissioners. And it is really unique in terms of its topography and what may come of it. And granted, right now, it's pretty hard to visualize, but I think long term, it will be one of the stars in our constellation of parks. It really is a very unique setting.
Anthony?
You know, I don't want to say Cecily, I actually do appreciate the question of it and kind of experience, but I'll say I think Big Marine is such a great example of what happened out there. I remember never thinking that was gonna happen. You know what I mean? It just didn't. And it was and a lot because it felt like there was, you know, how the city was moving to Big Marine, like its expansion, but I think the thing that happens is the people who own the property themselves, and I think the idea of the relationship building that happens with the implementing agencies is that those people get enlisted in the vision, right? And they have a sense of what it's been and want it to be a part of that and want people to have access. And it's a really unique character, I think, of the community of people here. And it's reflected in the system that's been built. And I think that is very much about culture. You know, and so I think that's where the implementing agencies build a relationship over time, but people stay in touch with you, and we wind up acquiring these small pieces, and then the momentum of that gives other people direction. And so I think this will be very interesting to watch over the next.
And actually, over the long term, there's some landowners where it's really helpful to have the really long range notice of that the county's interested. Because we've seen some people that may have a large farm and they'll start subdividing it and saying, I'm ready to sell off this piece, I don't need all of it. I'll start going down a little bit at a time, but I wanna keep my homestead for another 20 years or something. I'm gonna retire here, I just don't need to actively farm. So we can work with them on whatever makes the most sense. Sometimes there's people that wanna do sales over time in pieces because we have these limits on how much we can reimburse for. Some of them are breaking things up over years for tax purposes, because sometimes we get donations, either straight donation or often just accepting less than appraised value kind of a thing, and they can, you know, get a benefit to that. So it's useful for them to know, hey, someone has an interest in this, even if it's not right now. There's so much stuff that's, well, I either have to sell it to this person that just talked to me, or I lose that forever, whereas with the park systems, it can be someone has a standing interest, I can work with that however makes sense. Wendy?
I just wanted, as I recall, this is adjacent to a lot of DNR owned land along the river bottoms, is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair and Council Member, the NI WMA is directly to the south of that gold and blue property, so the subject property in the blue. So once this is all acquired, the amount of habitat and
As in like actually touching right here?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was really hard to read the report, it was really pixelated. Yeah.
Identifying those other things that are adjacent is helpful for people to understand better.
Yeah. Well, and that also ties into if we're talking about what kinds of things could potentially be open to the public sooner while knowing that the whole thing is still a long ways off. If there's another public parcel over there, that starts making this one more useful too. Anyone else? I was also gonna ask, I think I'm remembering this right, maybe this wouldn't qualify other ways anyway because of the agriculture, but am I right in thinking that you have to use legacy dollars when we are, when the purchase price was above the 10% more, even if we're only reimbursing for what does qualify?
Chair, yes, that's our general practice. We are allowed to go up to 110% with the NRTF, but it requires going to the full commission and getting their approval. So we tend to not do that.
Okay.
But in this case, there are also structures in the property, and so we had to use legacy. And fortunately, they're able to keep most of the structures and reuse them.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
For what?
Do you want to hear a little bit about Mr. Chair?
We so rarely hear you tell us, yes, we can keep the structures, so yeah, I'm intrigued.
Yes.
Bonus.
Yeah, there is a barn and a shed that will go away, but there's two quite large pole pole sheds. I think they're in the range of 5,000 square feet, in really good condition. And we'll be able to use those right away for storing vehicles, actually. We're gonna have a fleet of electric vehicles, I think, will be stored over the winter. And then there's kind of an odd old, at one time it was a small Rambler residence, but back in the 70s or 80s it was converted into an office in some really nice condition. So someone had been running a small, or I'll say a larger business out of there for a while. And it will be interesting to see how we can utilize that in the future for a public space. At a minimum, it could serve to house maintenance staff and that sort of thing, but we are intrigued, once we jump into the master plan and we'll explore more, but we're kind of intrigued with what are the interim possibilities for public use. Long-term, the location of this sort of office/residence is next to the pole shed, so it's not like a really great sort of public experience, but in an interim period, maybe it could serve something. So more to come on that in the future. So we'll be keeping those taken care of in the years to come, and we'll be utilizing those.
And are those expected to be like park-related purposes, or is that more general county?
No, those will be park related.
Okay.
Although we would definitely open them up for, the sheriff's office needs storage and that sort of thing. We often have interim need for equipment and things like that, but traditionally it's for parks. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Or anyone who wants to take an action?
I'll move the recommendation to grant $1,462,502 for the acquisition of said property.
Okay, so we have a motion from Bob for the recommendations from the staff report, a second from David. Thank you. Any discussion on that? Oh, I should read that again. That motion is then that the Metropolitan Council approve a grant of up to $1,462,502 from the Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund to Scott County to acquire approximately 123 acres located at 17525 263rd Street West in Belle Plaine for the Blakely Bluffs Park Reserve, and authorize the Executive Director of Community Development to execute the grant agreement and restrictive covenant on behalf of the council. Now, is there any other discussion on that? Otherwise, someone that probably should have been in there, but hearing none, all in favor of that as presented, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Okay, that motion carries, that's approved, thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Then we'll move on to our next one for Lake Rebecca Park Reserve, another Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund grant for Three Rivers this time. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. My name is Kevin Fan. I'm a planner at the Regional Parks and Trails team. And today I'll be bringing forward business item 2025-163, which is a Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund grant application for Lake Rebecca Park Reserve for the Van Horn property for Three Rivers Park District. So Lake Rebecca Park Reserve is located in the western part of our regional parks and trail system and is on the western edge of Hennepin County. And it's nestled along the Crow River and is located in the communities of Greenfield and Independence. The Park Reserve features Crow River, but also has multiple wetlands, Lake Rebecca, and vast expanses of the Big Woods landscape, which provides opportunities for recreation and high-quality natural areas. The Van Horn property is one of 6 remaining inholdings within the Park Reserve's boundaries and is fully surrounded by existing parkland. The parcel is 5 acres and is mainly comprised of unmowed brome grass and a spruce tree windbreak. The property also contains a single-family home and a detached garage. And the single-family home is intended to be sold and moved, and then the remaining structures will likely be removed after acquiring the land. The proposed project cost, or the appraised value, was $380,000, and the seller had agreed to that purchase price. With other costs added in, this led to a grand total of $467,514, and a total grant amount of $350,636, with Three Rivers Park District match of $116,878. The rationale for this recommendation is that the acquisition is consistent with the 2050 Regional Parks Policy Plan, the Parks and Trails Legacy Fund, the Lake Rebecca Park Reserve Long Range Plan, and Three Rivers Park District is within its $2 million per fiscal year limit for the Parks and Trails Legacy Fund Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund. This then leads to the recommendation that the Metropolitan Council approve a grant of up to $350,636 from the Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund to Three Rivers Park District to acquire approximately 5 acres located at 9045 Rebecca Park Trail in Greenfield, Minnesota for the Lake Rebecca Park Reserve, and to authorize the Community Development Director to execute the grant agreement and restrictive covenant on behalf of the Council. I'm happy to stand for any questions, and Jonathan Blaming from Three Rivers Park District is also here to answer questions needed.
All right, thank you. Questions, commissioners? Really? Well, if they don't. The stewardship costs are relatively high. I'm guessing that's related to moving the house.
Yeah, so the stewardship costs are currently assuming a standard like single family home demolition. So right now, they're putting those costs in just in case any costs go higher while moving the house. But right now, from what I recall, Three Rivers is currently piloting certain parcels and acquisitions and moving or selling those houses just to see how much cost savings they have in terms of not having to demolish the home. So that's kind of one of 4 parcels, but the stewardship costs are still a little higher just because it anticipates if there was a standard demolition and if any additional costs are like saved, then the rest of the stewardship costs would go towards things like restoration work that wouldn't usually go towards that parcel.
Okay, so that they're, because this is a relatively just open thing currently, that's not natural resource rich. So they're intending to essentially spend that money on this parcel regardless. It's just a question of which thing it ends up being for, whether it has to be demolition stuff or put it into the restoration work.
Mr. Chair, that seems to be correct, and if Three Rivers wants to chime in or provide any additional information, I'll invite them.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Blaming, Associate Superintendent for Planning and Design at Three Rivers. Yeah, this is one of our experiments in selling houses and moving them to reuse them instead of to deconstruct them. And what we've been doing lately prior to this is deconstructing and reusing parts of houses. That's a more expensive way to demolition a house, but we felt it was worth it. And this is priced off of that deconstruction. We don't expect it to cost that much. We will get a little bit of money for selling the house, but it's not much, maybe a couple $1,000 total. And then that, of course, would go off at the top of this. You folks, the total amount would go down. Yeah. I don't expect that we'd use all of the requested funds if we are successful in selling the house and having it moved, because we won't have to demo it.
Okay, so I guess that's part of what I was getting at. If it ends up actually being cheaper, then the amount coming from the council is actually less to go along with that?
Yeah, we sometimes don't use all of it, because things came in better than we planned.
Okay. Yeah, I just wasn't sure about like how you price that in, because I know we had one other one like this. You talked about essentially the seller basically pays to move it, but it makes sense because you don't know if you have a buyer of it.
Right.
Rather. So you have to have the demolition costs in case it doesn't sell. Yeah. Okay. Yes, Bob?
Mr. Chair and Jonathan, I am delighted to hear that you are looking to try to reuse that house. after all these years, I applaud you greatly for that.
My pleasure. It's the right thing to do. Let's see if we can do it.
But
We've been working with the county and the Met Council itself on other ones as well.
Yeah, well, I hope it works, I really do.
This one's, the folks that we've been talking with are all private market. Reuse in different ways. We have no control over it once it's been bought.
Yeah.
anybody else? Or motion?
I move to approve the grant of up to $350,636 and
You can just say the proposed action, because I have to read
the
it anyway.
proposed actions.
Anyone want to second that?
Second.
Second from Anthony. All right, so then the motion on the table is that the Metropolitan Council approve a grant of up to $350,636 from the Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund to Three Rivers Park District to acquire approximately 5 acres located at 9045 Rebecca Park Trail in Greenfield, Minnesota for the Lake Rebecca Park Reserve, and authorize the Executive Director of the Community Development to execute the grant agreement and restrictive covenant on behalf of the council. Discussion. And yeah, this would probably be where we should say, yeah, we like that you're trying with the structures. I don't know if you'll succeed on all of these because it's ambitious and complicated, but we like to see the effort. Anything else? Okay. Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? That motion carries. I will hit you with one question, because usually I get Jessica, and we're going to try it on you. So if both of these go through the council, and we have new stuff for new fiscal year, what would be our approximate balances in our two funds?
Mr. Chair, I think it would be $2 million minus the grant amount. I'm looking back to Jessica just to make sure that's correct.
She's going, oh, I gotta correct it.
I happen to have those amounts written down.
We know, tell them that
Chair.
that question's coming.
Commissioners. There's 2 more acquisitions coming next month, and after that, we will have 600,000 left in legacy and 2.7 left in ENRTF, 2.7 million. But we will be bringing in an additional 4 million in legacy in September. And then next year, we'll have another 4.5 million in legacy.
Okay, so that 4 million from the legacy stuff is, it's not like on July 1 like some other fiscal stuff, it has to wait for some sort of other processing thing.
Yeah, we have to bring it through a council budget amendment, and so it'll come through the Q3 budget amendment in September.
Oh, so like the council already has it, but we don't? Is that how that works?
I think that's how it works, yes. So we can't technically
We can't disperse it,
obligate it to
but
anything yet.
the
but
state has given it to the council.
yes.
Okay, cool, thanks. Yes, Ed?
Before Jessica leaves, I just wanted to say Jessica did a beautiful job presenting to the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources this past week with a $3 million request for Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. And they're in the deliberation phase of that, so keep your fingers crossed because that is an important source for the regional parks and trails.
So we may get more of that too,
And that would also come next July 1.
next July 1. Okay. So, thanks. Okay, that brings us on to some information items, starting with our system annual use estimates. And I think we have some new staff that we maybe don't know as well. Yes, ma'am, go ahead. I don't know if you've maybe seen you once before?
Good afternoon, Chair, Council Member, Commissioners. Yes, this is my second year in the Council. I took over my colleague Darcy Vandergrift, and she is now moved to a manager position within research. So I'll be taking over the annual use estimates and also some other responsibilities of the principal park researcher. So what that leads me to presenting about the 2024 annual use estimates. So just as a brief background, the annual use estimates are produced annually since 1995. These estimates are used in formulas to calculate each implementing agency shared regional parks and trail system grant program dollars that my colleague Nicole was talking about. And also, it also allows us to monitor some trends of visitation over time. This is one of dispossession's responsibilities with the park. The other one is a visitor study that happens every 5 years. The annual use estimates include data from 132 regional parks, trails, park reserves, and special recreation features. And this is also the 4th year that we're using the multipliers from the 2021 visitor study. And this annual estimated visitation is one of the ways to demonstrate the value of the regional park and trail system. The other ones include climate mitigation, carbon capture, and public health benefits. As a reminder of how we go about calculating annual use estimates, is that first, I want to point out this is a true example of interagency collaboration with our park partners. The process begins with the counts conducted by regional park implementing agency staff at parks and trails across the metro area. Park staff count pedestrians, cyclists, vehicles, buses, horses, and boats entering a park or a trail. Counts, or the schedule is created and coordinated by council staff between the Saturday before Memorial Day and Labor Day, which is approximately 99 days. And then they're randomized across days, times, and park and trail entrances. In 2024, the council coordinated thousands of these counts. To reduce the impact of weather, construction, or other anomalies, we average the counts with the previous 3 years. And then we expound these counts by taking into account to scale up using the multipliers, which are informed by the park visitor study, and these are the people per vehicle. We also use unaccounted days and times, and also we use it to amplify it, use similar entrances that are not directly counted, that have similar visitation patterns. After all this is being calculated, we receive from our park partners special events data that then is added. And then we also add more data regarding non-summer visitation, and this is just spring, fall, and winter use. And then we have our final number. And in 2024, we calculated, estimated as 65.7 million visits, 45.6 in parks, and 20.1 in trails. This represents a decrease in visitation of 5.4% from last year. It is typical that some agencies see some increases, some decreases. As of last year, the regional trail system has expanded to a total of 523 miles. And the trail only dipped slightly of 0.8%. We believe that this is mainly driven, the dip in visits is driven mainly by weather anomalies and some constructions on important trails and parks. And we expect that without the effect of rain, particularly, the visitation will remain flat around 69 millions. So exploring more why visitation decreased in 2024. This is typical. There's variation in sample counts from year to year. The primary aspect, my consideration, is that that there were consistent and frequent rain patterns during the summer counts in 2024. There's also wide variety of variation between agencies. Some go up, some go down. And also the effects of more years with lower vertical multipliers from the 2021 visitor study was a factor. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency, it rained 47 days out of the 99 days from Memorial Day to Labor Day in 2024. This is 45% of the days that we get to count, 45% had some rain. For the use estimates, there was an overlap of 44%, which is a little bit less than half of. So it was a pretty rainy day and 44% of the counts coincided with rain. In comparison, previous years, 2023, 2022, and 2021, we saw less of an overlap, 24% in 2021 and 2023 at 24% as well, and 35% in 2022. This slide shows annual visitation separated by park agency. Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board had the highest visitation among the 10 agencies in 2024 with 26.4 million visitors, followed by Three Rivers at 14.1, and the city of St. Paul with 7.6 million visitors. Carver County showed the largest increase in visitation with approximately 14% more in visits than in 2023. This could be explained by the continuing popularity of the new facilities in Lake Laconia, and also some other investments that they have had. We have also observed some decreases in some park agencies, and this seems to be very typical, as some go up and some go down. And all these changes can be understood again by trail investment and sample variation across the counting the years, and also primarily due to weather patterns. The most visited parks in the trail system was Minneapolis Chain of Lakes Regional Park at 6.9 million visits, followed by Central Mississippi Riverfront Regional Park and Mississippi Gorge Regional Park, both with 3.6 million visits, and Minnehaha Regional Park at 2.3 million visits. For the most visited trails in the system, we have Minnehaha Park Regional Trail at 2.6 million visits, 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail, and Cedar Lake Regional Trail, both at 1 million visits. And as a quick update about the visitor study, the visitor study is coming up next year, and this visitor study is going to help us inform planning, policy, and management. It also evaluate and strengthen equitable use of the regional parks and trails in accordance to Imagine 2050 Parks and Trails Policy Plan, and it will also update the data in funding formulas to help determine where funding goes for parks and trails. Related to the multipliers earlier in my presentation. And just as a quick timeline, we're currently in ongoing conversations with procurement here at the Metropolitan Council. We hope to have a consultant by fall and in this year, so we can start doing work starting in January. We start the preliminary survey during the summer, and we're gonna continue to work on the park visitor study all the way until winter 2026. The pilot study will happen in summer, as I mentioned, and during the spring and summer we'll do the intercept survey that will expand all across the metro area. During fall and winter, we're gonna do data analysis and some workshops with our partners, implementing agencies, and to develop the new multipliers for the use estimates. We hope to complete the study publication by late winter or early spring. Winter in 2026 or spring in 2027. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you. Questions, commissioners? Yes.
Is there, just thinking about Ramsey County, for example, with the improvements of Battle Creek, is there an opportunity to do some enhanced counts with winter, especially in places where they're making investments, in that regard?
Chair, council member, commissioners. The methodology as it stands right now does not allow for winter count visits. That's why we have the park visitor study. If there could be perhaps conversations, I can bring this up to my managers to think about a methodology to do some winter counting. However, this also brings an important topic of conversation with our partners implementing agencies to see if there's the staff and the because typically our partners, park implementing agencies, they do the counting. So if there would be a substantially more staffing that need to be done to do the counts during winter. So
We stop at basically Labor Day, is that?
yeah.
And I would say that I just feel like all the implementing agencies in terms of some of the programming, this is just intuitive, but it feels like there's more usage in September. I feel like there, and it is calmer, there's less bugs, there's a bunch that's going on around the ways that I think that the implementing agencies are programming the parks themselves, and so I'm not I ask, is there something that gives us more information regarding what happens, between September and October? And again, I just think there's a lot going on around, they're inviting people into the parks, a lot of programming, ambassador programs. I mean, there just seems to be a lot going on that may be useful for us in terms of the data, especially with the more rainy days in summer. September all of a sudden looks really good to people, right?
Yeah.
Or maple tapping, I don't know, there's just a bunch going on in the parks themselves in terms of bringing people in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think we bring this up every year. Certainly a lot of the uses in the park don't happen year-round, but trail use does. You have runners, you have cyclists, you have the fat tire bike, not fat bike, whatever the heck they are, users. And, you also have ice skaters and cross-country skiers. So I think this estimate really isn't accurate for regional trail use. It may be accurate for park use. And past couple years, we've had really warm Novembers. There have been a lot of 50-degree days. And, I just know the regional parks near me are pretty busy.
Yeah. So every time we bring this up, we're told that the limitation is in resources and funding and stuff. So help me understand what that looks like. Our funding statement on our agenda item says this is paid for with staff time from the CDC budget, but you're saying also that a lot of park agency staff are involved. Is the council reimbursing agencies for staff time to do this, or is our funding statement on here only partially correct?
Chair, Councilmember Commissioner, that's a really good question, and yes. Implementing agencies, they use their own money to staff their people to go out and count. So the council does not provide funding for counters. Just for staff like myself, there's funding. However, there's no, we don't reimburse park agencies for their own employees that go out and count.
Okay, so what we actually fund is the crunching of the numbers, not the making the number.
Correct, the methodology aspect of it and the crunchy numbers and the whole aspect of getting the estimated use estimates. Yeah.
Yes, Emmett.
I just wanted to say, this question does come up every year.
Every single year.
And the methodology for counting, 60+ million people, I'll just say it's complicated. it's a huge endeavor, and it does involve so many staff from our implementing agencies. And we are listening, but we're using what I think is a very defensible methodology for doing this, and switching that out is not something we would do lightly, but we are listening and we're thinking, and this is something that if we were to ever change our methodology, it would be multiple years and significant investment.
Yeah.
But it would justify all the funding that's going into the regional parks and trails too.
Yep.
And the messaging they're giving to the legislature and the taxpayers. I mean, it's a good reason for it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It might be worthwhile next year when we do the full survey to compare your projections for the other seasons with cell phone data. Because then you can get an idea of the magnitude of summer versus winter.
Yeah.
With kind of a little more accuracy.
No. So the other piece of this that I'm trying to figure out how we can use the park agency resources most effectively for us without adding to their burden.
Yeah.
So I need to recognize first that I know the park agencies all have a lot of seasonal staff they hire, and I have no idea to what extent seasonal staff may be involved in doing this count and whether they might be available in the off season or not. But if it is year-round staff, there is also some stuff that's potentially quieter in office in the off season that maybe they have some room. So my potentially radical idea here, given that we're talking about a 4-year rolling average already, is what if we just alternated and 1 year we do the count the way we've been doing, and the next year we only counted off-season stuff, Labor Day to Memorial Day. So that we're using the same amount of staff time, just at a different time of year. I have no idea whether that works for the park agencies, but since you already have workshops scheduled for planning the visitor study, I think that's something to discuss with them. Like, could you use, if it's all their staff time and their money, I don't want to say double your investment just so we get better numbers, but would they be open to moving their investment around? Is that feasible from a staffing standpoint to do that and get us different stuff? Because I think we've had some pretty substantial shifts. You talk like this would be a significant departure, but I think we've been talking about a significant departure because this was all kind of designed with the idea that off-season is sort of a extra secondary thing. But our conversations have been over the last several years that that's not really the case. Not only do we want to recognize it, but also when we were talking about our policy plan update, we really highlighted how a significant portion of what it means to live in this region is embracing winter and the other things that come with that. We also have talked a lot about climate change and its effects on the system, and part of that means that summer is going to be hotter and rainier and wildfire smokier and potentially just less usable. And that might push more and more of our use into the off seasons. And we're trying to encourage that with investments. We've had, places developing new trails that are targeted at winter sports. We have places that are doing snowmaking. As you said, there's a lot of places that just are more pleasant in the fall, fewer bugs, things like that. So I don't know if we can continue treating it as a secondary thing. I think we need a solution. I don't know what the solution is, but the one that I'd throw out there to ask the agencies whether it's even possible is, could you do a complete count that's non-summer, at least part of the time, either every other year or maybe it's 1 year out of the 4-year rolling average or something. Have something that's not just based on multipliers that we can use to validate, are these multipliers at all close? The cell phone data would get us somewhere, but it's also still different than what our summer data is, so you can't necessarily compare those. What I really want to know is, here's the multiplier we've been basing all of our assumptions on. Here's data. Do they match? Is this at all based in reality, or are we completely making it up?
I wanted to say, we do meet, and Ismail has a technical advisory team that he works closely with, so So we have been exploring this, but we're in the early stages of this, because it's not a small investment to change methodology.
Right.
That we had really high hopes for the cell phone data, we call it the streetlight data, and that, there was a privacy change, that the cell phone companies made that no longer makes that information available to us. So this is, hopeful new technology that we thought was really gonna make it a lot less expensive and a lot more accurate is no longer available. So we're still out there looking for other approaches, but I just wanted to throw that out there because.
And I also want to recognize that if we did make a significant change and that resulted in numbers that were different than we expected, that would be a potentially significant loop to throw the budgets of the agencies for. So I also really want feedback from the agencies of what can you tolerate in terms of changes to these formulas? Like, do we need to say, we're just not gonna count the first 2 years, these are informational only, and we're just gonna have to use old numbers for a while? Or do we do a rolling average that's longer for a while or something? Basically, put the question to the agencies, like, here's what we want to accomplish. And we have a few of them in the audience, they all know what our conversations have been about this for years and years. Do you have any ideas about how we could accomplish it in a way that makes sense to you for staffing and would make sense to your boards in terms of the finances and the impacts and how to do long-term planning? Because you can't plan 10 years out if we're saying, hey, we're gonna change how your funding works in the next 4 years. That's not really a thing. So just, how can we do this differently? Because we're saying what we have now doesn't really work for us. We're constantly frustrated, but we also know that it's significantly complicated to change. So is there anybody smarter than us that can tell us a good way to change it? Basically.
Unfortunately, I'm not that guy, but that is
You're
something
the guy
we can
that
talk to.
schedules the
Yes.
meetings to ask.
We can explore that.
Yeah, that's all. Before you, Amanda, did you have something?
I was just gonna note, the cell phone data, like, that is a really great tool, but you're right, that it did.
For transportation use.
Because it was used like for downtown, like return to office, seeing like what capacities things were at, and that would have been a really great solution, but.
And I think all of our presentations about it were probably before your appointment, but yeah, we had some stuff pretty in-depth, and part of it was, we had some concerns about the privacy, but we went back and forth and kind of, we thought how we were using it was gonna be okay, and then somebody said, no, we're gonna close it down even further than that, and then it was no longer useful, so. Cecily?
Well, there's something called volunteers.
Yes.
Volunteers can be trained to do counts, and that's something I did in San Mateo County Parks. We train volunteers and we even incentivize some of them. But I have another question for you. Did you mention that you count boats on cars coming into parks?
Boats and cars, so separate.
And
Yeah,
how do you
boating.
use the boat data? I hadn't heard boats before in this visitor.
Just the ones that have access to parks that have the opportunities for boating. We also, park agencies also count boats.
But counting it doesn't really tell you how they're gonna be used or how many people are gonna be using the boat, is it?
There's a multiplier for
A
boats.
multiplier.
Yeah, that is also,
There's multipliers.
Well, and I think part of what you're getting at is,
yes,
you're counting park entrances
Park
by
entrances,
boat. As in, you're coming in only on a boat, your car hasn't come in, like there's places where you can launch outside of a park and then come into the park via boat. That's what we're counting, right?
correct. We just only count, or the park agencies count entering, either people, bicycles, scooters, just only entering from a specific place that they informed us that they will be counted.
Bob?
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, and Councilman Wolf, I think the point that Tony is making about testing out a winter and non-summer kind of season is a darn good one. And you all as people, along with the agency, they can figure out how to do that. But I really applaud the idea and think it makes a lot of sense. We've got a fair amount of data in terms of usage, and we already extrapolate an average of over 4 years. And so we wouldn't be losing a lot to at least experiment for 1 year. So I happen to support that.
Also, to Wendy perhaps to explore if there is some increase in resources necessary to pull off something, is there any flexibility for maybe the council to increase some funding to data collection purposes, whether it's either our own staff or possibly something to reimburse agencies or incentives for mostly volunteer stuff or any sort of a temporary employee or something. I have no idea how much this stuff costs and what your budgets look like, but it might be something to ask at CDC of, is this something that we're interested in helping out with somehow?
The challenge from a budget standpoint is our general fund is only around $16 million, I think. Most of our money is stuck in various pots that can't be moved around.
Right, yeah. I'm saying, I don't expect there to be a lot of flexibility, but I thought I'd put the question forward of something to consider if we have any. Because fundamentally what it comes down to is it's this body and the council that's asking for better data. So if there's anything we can put our money where our mouth is to get it, that might help. Tess?
I mean, maybe just looking to the people who use the parks in winter, I think that, and asking them to, I don't know, check in or do something like that. I think if people knew that the importance of this information in terms of funding for the parks, doing more restoration and development for the parks, providing more opportunities for people to use the parks in winter, that those visitors would be, well, encouraged and probably excited about participating in this specific aspect of the regional parks. I think people are pretty winter people. I'm not one of them, but I know them to be really passionate about winter. And so preserving those spaces for them to be active, and I think might be a step, probably not the whole solution, but maybe a step in the right direction of getting some of that data.
Yeah, that's a possibility. I will say there are some risks there also of, one, having that off-season data coming from a different methodology. But also someone would have to look at whether we might get skewed data of like certain populations of users being more likely to self-report. I don't know if, like, especially like how do we communicate that, right? There's some of our users are more clued into council communications and official publications and stuff than others. And so we might get an over response from the whiter, wealthier, English-speaking, potentially outside of urban core users that might move it. And you work with those kinds of confounding variable stuff all the time, so you might be able to figure out a way to adjust for that. But that would certainly be something we'd have to consider and that kind of stuff. So David, and then you.
Just sorry for not knowing how this is done, but can I just ask a basic question on when staff are employed, how are they counting? Like what is it, a clipboard and they're putting hash marks, or like what's actually the method?
Yeah, good question. Chair, council members, commissioners, yes. So once we develop the schedule, these are just thousands of counts and dates that we give out to our partners. We also provide a survey that the methodology mentions that they need to print it out. And they have to tally everything by hand, and then they will submit it through Qualtrics. And once we have all the data in Qualtrics here at the Metropolitan Council, we download the data and we start the whole the whole process to develop the use estimates. So yes, there's somebody there that is in a period of 2 hours. It is on an entrance of a specific park, counting how many people go in.
So just a comment, because I agree with Anthony's assertion here on getting the other seasons. It just seems super painful, honestly, and like prone to error, and I'm sure there's all kinds of super math that backs up, you know, the 2 hour period that the person's there to do that work. But I gotta believe if we can't use cell signals that, I mean, we've got pretty advanced cameras these days that are, you know, either infrared or just in the visual light spectrum that you can put some AI to so it recognizes human beings instead of a bear or whatever, and figure out like over a whole week, you know, like 24 hours without it being shut off. Let's say it's on a post and it's got a 360 view of what's coming in and out of the park. Like, there's just got to be a smarter way to be able to do that doesn't depend on human input all the time.
Well, and just like, you know, they do traffic studies, just little things that you drive over, or for just pedestrian traffic that won't trigger that. You can have, you know, the things with just the optical sensor of someone broke the beam. Because speaking of the privacy of the streetlight data, people might also get freaked out if we say we're watching them with cameras and doing AI processing.
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying.
So something that just says
have a
an object passed might go over better than a we took your picture. But yeah.
Granted, I knew saying AI would get some antennas up on that, but I mean the fact of the matter is like we want the data because it's so important to funding and being able to see the variation in seasons. Can't we use it in more of a harmless situation? I mean, we walk through airports all the time that can, if they want to see us naked, they can see us naked. But they trim it down and they do an education thing on, nope, we're not getting to that level, we're just getting, you know, these kinds of objects or whatever. Like, there's some way to do it, I think, that's unobtrusive, and it's just a part of, you know, maybe it's even just some notification on, hey, your park funding can be helped by this.
And to some extent, it might depend on like, how does the capital expense of some new technology compare to the operational expense of paying somebody to sit there with a clipboard? And the other thing is, we have to make sure that if there is anything that's gonna be acquired and used differently than a human, it has to match across all the agencies. And it's easy enough for us to give them a form and say, use this form. If we do ask them to buy something, then they have to all buy the same thing, and that's gonna be tricky. But I do think it's within the realm of possibility. I don't know what those kinds of systems cost, but I don't think they're enormous compared to budgets that are in the tens of millions that are using this data.
It's a whole lot cheaper now than it was 10 years ago for some
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, but if we have the opportunity to use people, let's do that.
I
Let's
agree with that
support
too.
That's also true.
employment.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't wanna get rid of the people, but if they could be doing better things with their time, that's also, so again, ask the agencies, what's the best way to do this? It feels like there's something better than what we're doing now. And maybe it's a combination of several things. Anthony?
You know, just because we've talked about it a long time, doing it one time really good could put this conversation to rest. I just think there, you know, and that's why I don't know if maybe summer is so overwhelming in terms of usage that the winter numbers would pale to that. Or maybe only Worth and Highland win, you know, I don't know, you know what I mean? Maybe that we're taking it the other direction, if we really get down to who goes in the park in winter. Maybe it skews more to, you know, those larger.
Yeah, if you come back to me and tell me that the entire Labor Day to Memorial Day use is 5% of the total, then maybe I should just shut up.
Maybe that's the value of it. It's just, it actually just validates what we, so then you can say, no, we've done this.
Yeah.
I mean, because it does come up every year.
Yeah.
Like every single year, because it makes, it seems to make sense to someone who is not in an implementing agency with a piece of paper counting people. So I just think maybe that's the reason why they have value, and I think everyone challenges the data. It's too easy, and maybe in some regards to challenge the data, and go, no, we've been doing this a long time, and maybe nothing happens in winter, maybe I'm wrong. And you know what, I overvalue winter. Like I really do know that, I know that as well, so I think that's something to take into account, but that is what it would do for us. You'd have the answer for every commissioner that ever comes back to this again. I know we did what Raintree did a winter.
Yeah.
And that's been
Yeah.
8 years now or something, bro?
I think,
2016, yeah, I mean, that was, we actually did that, you know, and so maybe there's something to go back to that is of value. So anyway, I'm sorry.
No, these are all great comments, and I just wanted to say.
Don't apologize.
Go ahead, Emmett.
The process of this count of the annual use estimate in my 10 years has been improved dramatically since when I started. Ismail is a high-end programmer. He does coding. We have the systems for entrances and how people approach, much more rigorous process. It's all automated. It's not like anymore like papers or individual iPads getting programmed. It is more of a coordinated, automated process. So we're headed in the right direction. There's always opportunity for improvement, and we hear you loud and clear that we need to do better with exploring the counts during the other seasons. Like, we know that, and that's just the current, the 2026 visitor study, we have a budget of $1 million. So the cost of it has gone up fairly dramatically too. And you know, $1 million isn't that much for some people, but for the parks and trails world, it's a significant investment.
There's also some other pieces, even within the summer season. Part of our problem is that the things that we've been telling agencies to do in terms of our policy encouragement, if they actually do them, are all harder to count, because we've heard increasing popularity of trails. Trails are harder to count than parks are. We've been saying, try to make your parks more integrated into the local community. So it's not just come into the one entrance to the park, have several connections into the neighborhoods. That's harder to count. Have coordination with other kinds of things. So if you're on the Mississippi, tie into the water trail of the National Park Service. Arrival by boat is harder to count. And then also are things of, you try to encourage winter use. If they do that, it's harder to count. So some of it is, how much of this is all still based on the way parks were and our assumptions were in the 70s and 80s, and versus, like, I always worry, imagine one hypothetical agency that looked at all the things that we ever told them, we'd like you to do more of this, and here's what's looking forward, and they did all of them, and nobody else did. And then, is their funding off by 50% because their stuff doesn't match? I mean, maybe not. I imagine if there was anything that was that far off, and there was an agency that felt they were that one, they'd probably be complaining loudly about it. But there's probably still some of that going on somewhere, right?
And I think, Chair, that was my original kind of framing of it was really me literally seeing what's happening in terms of the programming. Like it is not imagined what's happening in September is real. The number of families, new families that are biking out to Carver and using the bike camping thing. There are things happening in all of our systems that are directly related to implementing agency effort, guided by things that we've really talked about. And part of that was going, is there an impact? And is this what we used to see as a hard Labor Day thing? Is there a new bookend season that's emerging with September, but actually directly related to things I think that we're doing, and that is effort, an effort driven by, a 2050 plan that was a 2040, all these things. And so part of it was me really asking, does our count reflect that? And we want to justify bigger. I was talking about Ramsey County because I know that the effort to make Battle Creek active and vital in the winter to all of the people who live around Battle Creek is that going to be reflected? We want more investments. People are waiting for snow in their backyard, it ain't coming, right? There's a lot happening, and I just, that was my kind of thing about the counts and winter and programming that may be of value, and it'll put it to rest.
Just one final comment, I gotta believe that this is not unique. I mean, we have a great, system of parks here, but this is not a unique issue in terms of counts. So if someone goes to NRPA or City Parks Alliance or one of those, I'm sure someone else is struggling with those same kinds of issues. And if failing that, I guarantee you Disney on its parks, yes, they have counts of people buying tickets, but I guarantee you they've got cameras watching where people are congregating, where they're moving to and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
the answer's out there.
The one thing that is probably unique to us, I think nationally, is that we have this system of multiple agencies with, let's face it, somewhat competing interests financially. So if you have one agency who just wanted to get a grasp on their numbers, that's a little bit different driver than what we have to do where it changes the funding to multiple other people. But yeah, I think there's probably some advice we can glean from other places, but ours might also be unique in some ways. And clearly Lisa has something to say too, so go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to round out and remind folks that this is a census. It's not meant to get every single person every year. That's certainly outside of our financial capacity. It probably isn't worth the effort at the scale that we're using for inputs to our formula. So it's really about the proportion of how those work, and we want to make sure we have that kind of consistent methodology across. This is a regular discussion we know here, but also just among staff. We're users of the system too, and we like to see, like, are we doing this right? Are we getting the right things? Are we getting the right inputs to help inform this? And a part of that for us always is like, is doing the research on where, who else is doing counts, how are they doing them, what are the rules of thumbs for like, what are good estimates here? And we have made changes to that formula over years. We're not using assumptions from the 70s or 80s. We're using the most up-to-date types of information that help inform, like, well, how many people are actually coming to things? You might remember when we talked about COVID visitation as well, and how we do those things. We're like, well, we're gonna have to pause this year because we can't do counts in the way that we normally do them. But also maybe there were fewer people in cars, or maybe there's whole families in cars that maybe are different assumptions on how people are entering into the system. It would be nice to have a closed system where you're like, yep, one entrance, everybody goes in that entrance and we can count them. But managing a system across 3,000 square miles with so many ways of entering and exiting that system is a lot more complicated. And unfortunately, as we've talked about, that location-based cell phone data, we were really excited for to help solve a lot of our questions that we've had here. It is not gonna be able to solve that, and that's really put us back at that square one, going, okay, now what else can we do instead? So trust that it is something that our staff have been exploring and trying to figure out how else could we supplement this. The expansion of our visitor study is one of those ways that we do that, and it helps inform what those multipliers are and how we think about the ways that people are using the park system, and informs our methodology in visitor studies. So you might recall in our charts for visitation that we do have a marker of this is how we used to count it and this is how we count it going forward, and we expect that we'll have those similar things as we update our methodologies over the years, because it is a regular part of how we do our work, and is important to us too, of making sure that we're getting that year-round usage. I'm a winter lover too, but maybe I'm biased in that, but it is something that we want to be sure that we're saying, does this make a difference, or does it comport with the way that we have been estimating usage on an annual basis?
Yeah, I think it all just comes down to, can numbers be comparable? So like if you have a park that has 10 different entrances and a park that has one, I don't expect you to count every person that comes in all day long in all of the 10 entrances on all 365 days of the year. But I do want to know, are the numbers we're getting for those two parks equivalent? And similarly, if you have one park that has artificial snowmaking and one that doesn't, are the numbers we're getting for those equivalent, or do we have an assumption that thinks they're going to be the same when they're not? So we just have, we don't need to have, and like you said, it's about the proportions. So it doesn't matter what the numbers are, just that they reflect something about reality. and we're not sure of that, so we're saying get more numbers just to know if the closer we are to counting every visitor, the closer we are to the truth. But once we kind of know how far off we are, you can potentially pull it back to, okay, we only actually have to count 5% or whatever. But yeah, it feels like there's places that we might be missing the comparability, and that's the part we're nervous about. Yeah, we know it's not a census, that's true. Emmett.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to call out that it is 5:35 and we're gonna hit the Bob Mueller rule in approximately 25
Fair
minutes,
enough.
which is, we have a 2-hour meeting. And now that is an estimate, but I'm sensitive to people's time. And I mean, this is a great conversation. I have a ton of notes and the message is received that we need to continue to innovate, and we will. But we have brought in the national expert who we shared our methodology with. He reviewed ours, it was peer reviewed, and he's like, you are doing where the state of the art is. But there are opportunities, like, people have said, to continue to innovate. So we will, and we're lucky to have Ismail here because he's someone that is helping us move into that next century.
Is there anything about this that we haven't raised yet?
What is the typical variation? What is that typical variation? Is that, I think, explaining last year's drop is 5%? Is that?
It typically doesn't go that, the variation is very minimal. And it just accounts for some people went to the park, it was counted, the next year perhaps they didn't go. So the variation is very typical, but it's not that much variation to switch the proportionality of visitation per agency.
I suppose that's the other thing, is if it moved by 5% evenly on all of them, then it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Okay, then I think we can move on, thanks. That'll bring us to our Imagine 2050 Regional Parks and Trails Policy Plan Performance Measurement Update. This is new stuff that we said we wanted to do, basically. Go ahead. Tell us how we're doing.
Great, thanks. Good afternoon, Commissioners, Council Member, and Mr. Chair. I'm Colin Kelly. I'm a planning analyst. I'm here with Kevin Van, who you heard from earlier, and together we're here to share the draft performance measurement slate for the Regional Parks and Trails System. I'm also glad to note that my colleagues in Community Development Research, Kristen Riley-Torres and Sarah Nelson, are also here today and are key partners and truly leaders in this work. Moving right along, our desired outcomes for this information item include a refined slate of performance measures that align with the 2050 Regional Parks and Trails Policy Plan and enable us to effectively tell a story or stories about our collective work with regional park implementing agencies, protecting natural systems, providing exceptional outdoor recreation opportunities, and more. Commissioner Harris mentioned some important messaging with legislators and taxpayers during the last item. These measures could help us tell some of those stories that we need to tell. We'll also share a few of the next steps about the continued refinement of performance measures, as well as a timeline for performance measures related Imagine 2050 amendment to come. Why have or develop performance measures for the Regional Parks and Trails System? It's a good question. And the response parallels the rationale and the Imagine lens analysis on the first page of your staff report. For one, we've tasked ourselves with this work. The very first item in our policy plan work plan is to, quote, develop a process to create a small set of performance measures at the policy level to measure progress toward our key parks and trails system priorities. More importantly, perhaps, performance measurement generates accountability because it requires us to clearly articulate what we intend to accomplish with Imagine 2050 and the Regional Parks and Trails Policy Plan. And it offers opportunities for a research-informed dialogue about our work. Where have we been? Well, here's a timeline of performance measurement development for the Regional Parks and Trails System. Kind of new, but we've also been at this for a little while, at least in the background. Last fall, the Community Development Research Team, also known as CD Research, shared a draft report with the Regional Parks and Trails team containing proposed performance measures. CD Research also organized several workshops for council staff, policy liaisons, and that were intended to connect regional goals and performance measures across all council systems and policy areas. And this is an important point to underscore for today's discussion as well. We're not alone in the development of performance measures. There's similar efforts underway for each of the council's systems and policy areas, which will ultimately lead to an amendment to Imagine 2050, the Regional Development Guide, later this year, most likely. The draft slate of performance measures that Kevin and I will be sharing with you was directly influenced by last fall's implementing agency partner meeting, which was specifically focused on this topic of performance measures. CD Research staff took agency partners on a deep dive into the proposed measures, and we collectively received really good feedback that has influenced what is here today. A couple of additional items to note. Last winter, the Imagine 2050 Performance Measures Amendment timeline was pushed back from an intended adoption of March to September of this year. And between last month and when the snow flies again, CD Research will convene policy liaisons to continue finalizing performance measurement in each policy area. In fact, we now have a date on the calendar for outcomes measurement liaisons workshop time of July 30th, coming up at the end of this month. So work will continue in this space, and your feedback and advice tonight will help us move forward. As I mentioned on the last slide, the draft performance measures we'll be sharing were derived primarily from two main sources: the Parks Measurement Proposal Report and the November Partner Meeting. The measures that we have included here were selected based on agency feedback and recommendations, as well as data availability. Let's talk about levels of data development for a minute. What you see on the right side of this slide are 4 different levels of data development and availability. Starting on the right and moving left, number 1, available. Data for these measures are currently available, though some may require an additional or different approach to the analyses of the data. Number 2, within reach. Data development for these measures is feasible, often building on an existing process. Number 3, with further design. Where you got it, further research or evaluation is needed to define or refine the ideas or concepts. And number 4, with investment. These measures will require collaboration to design and execute, most likely via a new data development effort. All that said, and on each of the next 7 slides, the second column will reference the data status to give you a sense of whether the data is available now or it will require additional work to get it. This relates to the final bullet point here, which is the intention is to continue reducing or refining the total number of measures. We will share many possible options with you. Choosing measures that are aligned with data that is currently available or within reach is one way to reduce or refine the total number of measures and implement those measures rapidly. Moving into the policy plan itself. First, I'd like to orient you to the table you see here, which is organized in the same way over the next several slides. We've got 4 columns, including the proposed measure, data status, source, and cross-policy. We've already talked about the items in the second and third columns, so you should have a sense of the proposed measure's data status and its source. The cross-policy column is intended to highlight which proposed measures could be used for more than one policy plan section. Our policies begin with Section 2 of the Regional Parks and Trails Policy Plan. That is the system plan. That policy reads, as you see before you, maintain a robust and current set of data, maps, plans, processes, and applications to support Regional Parks and Trails Plan. There are currently 4 proposed measures associated with this policy, including visits to regional parks and trails, park acreage and trail mileage, estimated cost to complete the system, and amenity mapping across the system. Data for the first 3 measures here is generally available now. In partnership with regional park implementing agencies, We collect data for the first two annually and must update the cost to complete the system at least every 4 years. Regional park implementing agencies also proposed a measure around amenity mapping across the system, which is something that could be included with further design. Section 3 of the Regional Parks and Trails Policy Plan focuses on natural systems. A slightly shorter form of that policy could read, identify lands with high-quality natural features and restoration potential and protect them in perpetuity. The longer official version is here for your perusal. Like the previous policy, there are currently 4 proposed measures associated with this policy, including, once again, park acreage and trail mileage, improved water quality in regional parks and trails, acres converted from another use to natural systems, and the total amount of funding used for natural system protection and restoration. Data for the first 2 proposed measures here is again generally available. The first was mentioned on the previous slide. The second measure here is highlighted because it represents an opportunity for cross-council division collaboration, for example, between regional parks and environmental services. Regional park implementing agencies also proposed the measure that examines acres of converted lands, which is something that could be included with further design. Finally, from a data development perspective, the last measure listed here is within reach. As Kevin continues with the proposed measures over the next several slides, please continue to think about how the measures align with the policies they're intended to measure and how these measures could help the council and regional park implementing agencies talk about the work that we do together. Kevin?
Thank you, Colin. So moving on into section 4, which is our climate resilience policy, which currently reads, adapt and enhance the regional parks and trail system to promote resilience to climate change, including the mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. This policy currently has multiple sets of measures that are being proposed, so feel free to start looking at prioritizing them, but they read in order of park acreage and trail mileage, which has been seen throughout the previous 2 policies. Another one is also tracking the metric tons of carbon sequestration or carbon stock per square kilometer for system acquisitions. For both of those measures, the data is currently available as we used it for our policy plan intro section. The next ones are also focused more towards greenhouse gas emissions and CO2 emissions, and one of them is to look at greenhouse gas emissions of system operations decrease, and this one is currently within reach. And the other one that is proposed by the agencies was to monitor building energy use or CO2 emissions over time. Continuing with the theme of climate resiliency, we have 3 other measures, and the first 2 are partner proposed and have data available with further design, and they are measuring the number of electric vehicles per implementing agency or the number of environmental education programs being conducted. And last but not least, we also have looking at the total amount of funding used for natural system protection or restoration, which was also shown in the natural systems policy. Moving on into section 5, we have a planning policy, which currently reads, promote long-range planning and help provide integrated resource management across jurisdictions in order to create a seamless system that connects everyone to the outdoors. This has 3 proposed measures, and they read in the order of looking at the average age of all long-range plans. This data is currently within reach and was something that was proposed during the partner meeting. All of them are proposed during the partner meeting actually, but the next one is measuring how planning processes ensure equitable development. So for example, looking at the number of engagements or measuring engagement during council and agency planning efforts. This data would be available with investment. And then lastly, we also have looking at transit connection to parks, and this adheres mostly towards our second action within the policy, which focuses on multimodal access and planning. This data would probably be available with investment and was something recommended during the partner meeting. And this also has a highlight which indicates opportunity for cross-council division collaboration with either Metro Transit or MTS. Moving on into system protection, the policy reads, protect public investments in acquisition and development by assuring that every component in the system is able to fully carry out its designated role. There are two proposed measurements for this specific policy, and they were both recommended by the agencies. And they read acres negatively impacted by conversions and utilities, tracking that on an annual basis. This data would likely be available with further design. And we also have the dollar amount dedicated to land restoration, or looking at the percentage of land dedicated to natural areas versus recreation. And this data would probably be available with investment. Then moving on into section 7, which is our recreation facilities and programming policy. There's currently 6 proposed measures, and the policy currently reads as foster a sense of belonging by providing a wide spectrum of leisure and play opportunities while connecting people, places, and the natural world. The 6 policies currently read as the demographics of people involved in the regional parks and trail system more closely reflect that of the region. That is something that is originally proposed and would be available with investment. There's also the percentage of council active transportation funding going towards developing or redeveloping our regional trail network. This is specifically towards our 5th action within the policy, which is focused on trail system coordination. And this data was something that was proposed during the agency meetings and would likely be within reach. Next up, we also have tracking equity programming, and just looking at the number of programs that focus on specific equity groups. This was another one that was recommended during that partner meeting and is also within reach. Then we have another measure that would track inequities or visitation demographics by just hoping to see reduced inequities in visitation. That data is currently available and was something that was originally proposed. And then moving on, we also have looking at the equity grant program, and this one would specifically look at its ability to build the agency's capacities to serve prioritized populations. The data is considered to be within reach and was something that was originally proposed in the slate of measures. And then lastly, we also have amenity mapping across the system, which was seen in section 2 of the policy plan. And then last but not least, we have our finance section, and the policy reads, the Met Council administers, provides financial oversight, and collaborates with a range of partners to fund the 10 regional park implementing agencies in support of regional parks and trails system. There are 4 proposed measures, and half of these were seen in previous sections. The first one is the equity grant program, building agencies' capacities to serve prioritized populations. And then the other one is looking at the total amount of funding used for natural system protection or restoration. The other 2 proposed measures are looking at the annual funding gap in capital and maintenance and operations. That is something that was considered within reach and was something recommended during the partner meeting. And then the last one was looking at capital improvement. So looking at the balance and use of funds, balance of funding sources, shortfalls in funding, and what uses do shortfalls impact, and that is considered as the data is available and was something that was originally proposed. There was also a note from some of the agencies that may be looking at just all sources of funding annually as another proposed modification to that last measure. Moving on into the next steps. So after we present to you tonight and have this discussion, our next plans are to then bring this forward to the July 17th monthly partner meeting, where we'll be discussing this topic in presentation with our regional park implementing agencies to gather their feedback and their thoughts on the proposed slate of measures. Other future key dates include the month of July for 2025. There's currently 2 planned open house sessions with the Imagine 2050 policy areas to provide feedback to stakeholders and to also gather feedback and then provide information if needed. And then in September 2025, that is when the Imagine 2050 amendment process would begin for these performance measures. Sometime in the future, we do intend to return to MPOS just to provide a general update. But that brings us over to our discussion questions, which you can see on the slide here. feel free to read those, but in the interest of time, I'll open this up for discussion, but thank you.
Okay. Questions, discussion, Cecily?
Well, these are great. Thank you for putting this together, but I do have some questions. 4 of them, in fact. In the Imagine Lens analysis, it talks about performance measures can also help to illustrate social, economic, health, and environmental benefits. I don't see any ones that are really calling out health benefits in here. Then there's also nothing about the amount of trail use, but then in section 5, the planning policy, the transit connections to parks, did I hear you say that that was really looking at multimodal connections, not just public transit? Or maybe I misheard you.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner, I believe, yeah, it's looking at multimodal and transit would be like one of those aspects of convention.
Yeah, because the way it's written, you know, it makes it sound like buses, trains, light rail, whatever. It doesn't really.
It says transit.
Yeah.
Oh. Thank you.
Well, I don't think of walking as transit. I mean, that's.
I agree.
But whatever. Maybe everybody else understands that.
Well, it also captures, you're talking about multimodal can also be where the single trip is multimodal, so it's transit gets you most of the way there, but then you have to walk or bike the last mile. That's something we want to
Well,
go
not in
to.
Washington County. We'll
Yes.
never have multimodal.
We don't have anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Even though we pay for it, we don't have it. The other one that the wording I found awkward is in section 6, the acres negatively impacted by conversion and utilities. And in my mind, I was thinking, oh, well, maybe that's less taxes to municipalities, less utility use, but just the way it's phrased, I found kind of awkward. Maybe it was just 3 things.
That's places that are like within a park and then have to have, you know, a power line goes over it or a gas line or our own sewers kind of stuff in parkland, right?
Mr. Fisher, or Mr. Chair, yes, that would be correct.
Okay. Was that all, Cecily?
I guess so, because I'm wrong about everything.
Do you need responses to any of
No,
those or
no.
are those feedback? Okay.
Everybody else corrects me, yeah.
Sorry. Anyone else? I had a little bit. One thing potentially missing under the climate resiliency that we might have data for, tree canopy in terms of shade and transpiration, how that impacts temperature. I know the council did a mapping project several years ago showing that across the region, not just within parks. So maybe we can track something about how our parks are contributing to that, both overall and also the question of what is the equity across the region there, because there's some parts that are significantly warmer than others, and what can we do about that? Certainly I want to call out, you know, it showed up in a couple places, talking about the equity grant program. We've mentioned that before, wanting to know, so we've given these grants, are they accomplishing what we hoped they would? For the, you know, those particular parks, those particular agencies, those particular populations, do we have any data that shows that, you know, visitation has gone up among those populations as a result? Oh, and you know, it's into 2 or 3 different places talking about amenity mapping. Some that I want to make sure we include there, like it'll be easy to cover all the fun stuff like, you know, visitor centers and boat launches and whatever. 2 that we've talked about before are bathrooms, and both whether they exist and where they exist, and also whether they include a like gender neutral or family option. And then we also actually have a statutory mandate for park units to provide drinking water. So having data that says whether we're meeting that everywhere or not would be useful. We never talk about it, but it's in there for some reason. I know the last time it came up was when Bunker Hills' water system was broken. So. Yes, Wendy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a general comment that anywhere that you're saying dollars spent is a lazy metric that doesn't necessarily give you value. I mean, in theory, feeding our future was a spectacular success. But if you count the people that were actually fed, you have a different story.
Good point. True. Anyone else? Yes, Anthony?
You know, I actually had a question. How do you feel the average age of long-range plans as a measure is valuable? I'm, you know, shorter, longer, you know, from the agency proposed perspective, what is it? What do you feel that says?
I'm happy to take a crack at it, but I would welcome others. Our long-range plans, you know, some of them are getting old, but the reality is sometimes those older plans were so well done, there still is a lot left to do. So it's sort of a long way of saying it's complicated. I do think that agencies generally would like to update their long-range plans more frequently, but it's so expensive, long-range plans.
So as a measure,
Yeah,
I mean, I'm assuming there's some action that happens related to you measure this, right? So does that mean we update the plan or we don't update the plan? That's what I'm kind of saying, is that what you're describing is that it could be a good thing that we have a large average age for a plan, right?
I'm saying that it would be ideal if we could really prioritize some of those older plans that need to be updated, because the vision for the park is evolving and there's new work to be done. So generally speaking, the long-range plans do, you know, engage people and create that next vision for the area, so.
Yeah, 'cause I think what we've seen is some of the ones where they have done an update of one that was particularly old, they came to us and said, this is a lot different than the last one because the needs and desires of the community have changed a lot since we last looked into this. And so you're like, yeah, our previous plan had this, this, and this, and now we're talking to people, they don't want that, they want this completely other thing.
So you want a shorter average age?
Yeah.
Okay, that's
generally.
Sorry, that was
Yeah,
a simple question
this
that I
is
didn't-
saying,
What is it that you do?
are these new enough that they likely reflect current reality of what we want? That's what we're going for.
Okay. And I did say that I circled the same thing of multimodal versus transit. So you know, in terms of, you know, is that really what are we measuring transit connections? So we're looking at buses, LRT, Uber, you know, in terms of a measure, we want more connections, we want more public transit connections to parks.
Yeah, I think, and this is where it's a little bit tricky this might be actually two different measures, because we're talking about transit, we're talking about multimodal. Because one of the things we've talked about is we really want improvement of transit specifically, but we also have the recognition that a lot of people get to parks by multiple different ways, and we want to track that too. So this might be something that kind of gets split into, show us whether it's possible to use public transit to get there.
Well, and it's
But
a regional
also
park system, and
what the
I
other
think
things
it's
are.
really hard we are a car town.
Yeah.
Like at some point, like, you know, we love saying multimodal, we love all that stuff we say, we are a car town. And in 30 minutes, it's just a weird thing that and you know I'm down for biking every day, like I'm living and dying by it. And every day I say to my bike advocates, let's just accept that nobody bikes. That may be a great place to start. And we'll come up with some new solutions for this, right? You know, and we don't like catching buses. You know what I mean? Like there's something about it. So I go, is that a good measure? Yeah. And if it is, how are we going to put money behind it and really invest it? Because I think you know, so what's the action once again that we measure and then we do something? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? That's really kind of the point. As I read all of these, I kind of do this, okay, great, it's on the dashboard, and when it goes below 6, we infuse some cash or we do something, right?
Commissioner and Chair, excellent points. I do think that measure could be teased apart a little bit. We're not gonna, largely, as Cecily knows, the idea of providing public transportation in some parts of our region is not cost effective today, and it won't be cost effective tomorrow, and so.
Or on Saturday.
And we do have a good transportation system in this region for some areas that we don't do as good a job as we could promoting the opportunity to take public transit to the park. So like we have a really fun and simple pilot going with Metro Transit right now where we just identified 5 bus stops that we're going to try to light up and say, hey, did you know that you can take this to Minnehaha Regional Park? I mean, that's a simple one, but there are some out in Anoka County and Ramsey County and even Three Rivers Park District. So there's a couple we're gonna, and this is small. This is a small step, but it's a step.
So some of that might also get into, you have some measures on here about greenhouse gas emissions of system operations and electric vehicles per implementing agency. And we're talking about visitors. I have no idea how you'd measure or estimate this, but what about like the greenhouse gas emissions and fossil fuels for energy required to get to our parks? What is the climate impact of our visitors? And how is that impacted by the availability of transit, the availability of electric vehicle charging stations at the parks, things like that? Probably too complicated to measure, but I'll throw it out there.
But the impact is like a big deal, right, versus the number of electric carts that.
Right, yeah, it's like the implementing agency staff are not a huge percentage of the people going to the park.
And I think that's my kind of thing with because some of these measures but I really am going, so how does this dashboard, drive action and decision making is something, and what are the responses how are we using this in each of these measures so that it guides, you call it a performance measurement, right? And is there something that relates to that performance? Are you rewarded for good performance, or are you scolded for bad performance, right? Or is it self-regulating and then guides that? Because I think that's these look good in many ways. They're broad. You've got everything in there related to the environment. You've got equity. You've got financial responsibility and decision making. So I'm just really interested in how the dashboard then shows up in the ways that implementing agency manage activity and funding that they get. And on our side, is there something we do around performance, and maybe there's nothing we can do to how do we use this at the legislative level to drive more funding in terms of what we do, because that continues to be a thing. And or is there right now even I've been thinking a lot about the power of the implementing agencies that are able to tax, and how there's some power there in terms of what they do, and are there some things we start to do? Is there something we start to do? We already have the one, but there are more things we do to support some of the smaller ones to do those things. And lastly, is there something, Colin initiated something last year, and I'm feeling more interested in this kind of our trail system, and how are we coordinating and funding that in a way that is shared amongst the implementing agencies and their role and where they are geographically, because the trail system, the connectivity around it is everybody's part of it, right?
Yeah, I think you're right on a lot of that, but also in the interest of Colin and Kevin feeling like they can accomplish things and not be completely overwhelmed. I also want to recognize that I think a lot of the points you're raising are questions for us in the next policy plan update, because this is all brand new stuff where we said, we'd really like a lot of measurement of stuff. And then what do we do with those measures, I think is a policy question for us more than a question to staff at this moment. This is all just stuff that we sprung on them saying, we'd like some numbers. And then once we kind of see what we can get back from that, we can start deciding whether that has actions attached to it or which ones are useful, which ones aren't. I think that comes back to us in a couple of years once we have some of the data.
Oh, and Mr. Chair, Commissioner Taylor, another thing to note as well is a lot of the performance measures here are kind of scoped in the lens of Imagine 2050. So this will be kind of brought up to a very high strategic level. And I really like the ideas that you are all proposing of like, these would be very useful for the parks team or like how we look at our day-to-day stuff. And I think as we kind of mentioned, like this is currently in the scope of looking at the policy plan and just ensuring our accountability towards reaching the goals that we've listed. And then I think as for if we wanted to look at performance measures for the parks team specifically, I think that's another conversation that we could have in the future. And then I'd also like to play my favorite line of I'd also like to bring Kristen and Sarah to explain the scope of this if they'd like to. But yeah, I just wanted to add that context, but thank you.
Sure. Andy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think, that, following up on what Anthony said, I don't think that the transit measure is very helpful. I mean, the network future has already been figured out for the duration of this policy plan and probably for some time after that. And other than some microtransit, there's not going to be increased access to the lower density transit coverage of the region, so there's not a whole lot of point in measuring it. You also have the challenge of Minneapolis not allowing any buses on the parkways, which makes it harder to get to some of the park facilities, but I mean, that's already defined. We've been talking to death of how to get to parks on transit for as long as I've been on the council, and it's not going to see meaningful change. We've got a transit area that's going to stay our transit area for a long time, and we're making that better with a little bit of expansion, but there is no plans for any major expansions of the covered area of the region that has transit. And there are some places where lower performing routes are being cut because there's no point in having a bus that only runs once an hour and nobody takes it.
Well, it might not be a number that changes. Is there any value to just generating the number of here's which parks you can get to and which ones you can't as something to present basically the next time they update the transit plan? Or is that something where no matter how much we harp about it, the people that plan transit don't really care what we want because it's just finances?
It's not a reliable enough customer base to plan an actual route around is the problem. People usually either gather up a bunch of people and get in a car. If they don't have a car, they get together in a car, or the park agencies themselves work with cities and schools and whatnot to put together a bus for areas that don't have cars. You get a bunch of families that sign up through ECFE or the parks or whatever to get on a bus and go to a park at a specific time, but running a bus all of the time for very sparse traffic is not economically feasible.
I mean, Tony, it would be, you said, when we did Worth, when we did the trailhead, we worked really hard, we got the transit stuff there. I'd love to see those numbers of how many people actually catch transit that drops you in front of the trailhead.
Oh, so you're asking not where can you get to, but for the places that you can, is anyone doing it?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that those are the things we run into is that even where you can go, they don't. It's not, and on Saturday, right? And Sunday is once an hour, you know, it winds up, it just is something. So anyway, I just think it's just one of those things that is a real measure. Is it something we're committing to impact? Because if we're not, we don't really need to measure it. You know, it's a great brochure, yes, Tony, you should know every park that you can get a bus to.
Yeah.
And most importantly, you should know how to get there from your house. Like, that's the real ultimate measure, is how can I get to a park from my house on transit?
Then your map app will tell you that.
And that's what it is, so I just don't know if it's, you know. Yeah, it sounds good.
Yeah. To be determined, I guess. Anything else? All right, thank you for now, and we'll talk more about it later.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
That brings us on then to reports. I guess the one I'll mention is I get some email updates, just as chair. There have been some conversations going on about revisiting what exactly is listed where in terms of the Secretary of State's open appointments page and possibly campaign finance things in terms of personal data of individuals because of the tragedy that happened for the legislature recently. Nobody has asked for my input so far, just letting me know that they're discussing it, but if you have comments you want filtered back up to somebody, I may have avenues to do that at some point. So I don't know how much that affects us, but if you have something to say, you can let me know and I'll pass it to whoever seems to be doing that stuff. But any other commissioners have reports? Or liaison? Or staff?
Nicole, you wanna go first?
Commissioners, just a quick legislative update since we were in special session that didn't end prior to your last meeting. So just a very quick recap. I already went over the O&M, but I'll just reiterate that we've got $9.22 million for O&M from the Lottery and Lieu Fund, which is that $250,000 per year increase. Also $2.54 million from the general fund, so for a total of $11.7. For Parks and Trails Legacy for fiscal 26, we got $24.3 million and $27.22 million for fiscal 27. So I think it's probably not a secret to anybody here that there's some budget deficit looming for the state. So that actually represents a 10.75% decrease in the overall legacy funding for the biennium compared to last biennium. And then not directly regional parks related, but we did get some additional funding for the community tree planting grant program. So we got $900,000 from state general fund, so park implementing agencies are eligible to apply as well as local governments. And additionally, that program received a $1 million appropriation from the bonding legislation. Unfortunately, regional parks did not receive any appropriation from the bonding bill.
Thanks, Nicole. I have three very quick updates. The first, I'm pleased to introduce our newest parks employee, our new park ambassador manager, Tony Tao. Tony comes to us from Ramsey County. Do you want to say a word or two?
Well, first, great meeting you all and great being here and seeing everyone. I'm super excited to be here. I come from Ramsey County Parks and Rec, so one of the 10 implementing agencies. Yeah, just super excited to be here and just super excited to be a sponge and just soak in everything and learn and go. So yeah.
Well, thanks, Tony. We're glad you're here. I don't know if anyone noticed, but it really rained on the day we proposed to do that Kenilworth Tunnel Tour and Midtown Greenway Cedar Lake Regional Trail Tour. So that was canceled. We are working on a new date and we're looking at potentially a Friday in September. So we will get that information out to you when we determine it. But I really hope that if you are interested and available that you'll come do it. Three Rivers Park District has kindly offered to bring their bike fleet for, I think they can serve up to 14 or 15 people with that, so. Finally, our September MPOSC meeting, we've nailed it down with Carver County. We are going to retain our Thursday, September 4th date, so that will be the day. Yeah, you might want to carpool because Baylor Park is a little bit out in the western part of the region, but it'll be a really great park and park tour. This is a park that is being actively planned, so they want to hear from you in terms of like, what are your ideas for that? Really looking forward to that too. So stay tuned, more information to come. Thanks, Tony.
All right, and with that, we can adjourn. Thank you.